She was forced to marry a broke delivery guy. Her stepmother had no clue. He was a billionaire. Before we begin the story, please leave a comment letting us know where you're watching from. Enjoy the story. Once upon a time, in a small Georgia town, a young woman named Grace Collins was living a quiet nightmare. Her father, Robert, had passed away years earlier, leaving her in the hands of her cold, manipulative stepmother, Linda, and her two spoiled stepsisters, Chloe and Samantha. While they lived in comfort, Grace cooked, cleaned, and worked like a servant in her own home. She wasn't allowed to go out, make friends, or even speak her mind. To the outside world, she didn't exist. Her stepmother often said, "You're lucky I even let you live here." Everyone in town ignored her, until he showed up. Ethan Blake was the new delivery guy, broke, scruffy, quiet. No one cared who he was. The town gossiped, probably homeless, or worse. But what nobody knew was that Ethan was actually a billionaire in disguise, tired of being used for his money and searching for someone real. One day, Grace tripped on the sidewalk, groceries flying everywhere. Ethan helped her up, replaced her broken eggs from his own truck, and smiled. "Don't worry," he said. "Eggs are cheap." "You're not." That moment changed everything. From that day on, Grace noticed him. And he noticed her. Her stepmother mocked it. "A broke delivery boy? Perfect for a maid like you." But little did she know, the man she was mocking would soon become her worst regret. After Grace met Ethan, the small spark of hope inside her began to grow. But in a house like hers, hope was dangerous. Her stepmother, Linda, noticed the change in her almost instantly. "You've been smiling a lot lately," Linda said one morning, arms crossed in the kitchen. "Let me guess, it's that broke delivery boy. You think a man like that will save you?" Grace said nothing. She'd learned silence was safer. That day, her chores doubled. Linda made her scrub the kitchen floor on her knees, then rewash the laundry that had already been folded. When Grace finally sat down to eat dinner, the plate meant for her had already been scraped into the trash. "You can eat after my girls have had enough," Linda said. "You don't need food to scrub floors." Grace cried that night, curled up on a mattress in the attic with a thin blanket. But she refused to let Linda take away that little memory of Ethan helping her, of how gentle he was, of how human she had felt, just for a moment. The next few weeks were worse than usual. Every time Ethan's delivery truck passed the house, Chloe and Samantha would laugh out loud and say things like, "Look, your boyfriend's here to drop off breadcrumbs. Maybe you two can open a bakery in the dumpster." Linda didn't stop them. She encouraged it. One evening, Grace stepped outside just to breathe and saw Ethan parked across the street. He waved. She smiled weakly. The front door slammed behind her. Linda stood on the porch. "Don't wave at him," she snapped. "People will start thinking you're trying to marry beneath us." Grace wanted to scream. Beneath what? They were barely getting by. Linda lived off the last of Robert's savings and small checks from a disability claim that may or may not have been real. But in her mind, appearances mattered more than truth. That weekend, a church family picnic was announced. Grace had always loved those as a child, until Linda banned her from attending. This time, Chloe and Samantha were going, dressed in flashy outfits, hoping to meet wealthy men. Grace asked quietly if she could join. Linda's response, "Of course, sweetheart," she said sweetly, "but only after you clean the entire house, top to bottom, and iron all our clothes. If you finish in time, maybe." Grace started at sunrise. By noon, she was still dusting windows. By the time she finished ironing the final dress, the car had already left. Linda didn't even leave a note. Later that evening, Ethan came by to drop off bread at the local diner. He noticed Grace wasn't there, as she sometimes helped part-time for tips. "Where's Grace?" he asked the diner owner. The old woman just shook her head. Still locked up in that house. You know how that stepmother is. Ethan's heart sank. He had grown used to small towns having ugly secrets, but this felt personal. He didn't just like Grace. He respected her. She carried herself with grace despite everything. And he knew she deserved more. Back at the house, Grace sat on the front steps, arms wrapped around her knees. Linda and the girls came home laughing. "You didn't miss much," Chloe said, tossing a church flyer at her. "Just the town's eligible men getting stolen by smarter women." Grace didn't reply, but inside, something shifted. A quiet, deep anger was forming, mixed with longing and the question that haunted her most. Is this all my life is ever going to be? Days turned into weeks, and Ethan's quiet kindness became Grace's only escape. She never expected someone to care, not someone like him. He didn't ask questions. He didn't judge her worn-out shoes or the bruises on her wrists from endless chores. He just showed up. Every Tuesday and Friday, his old truck would rumble past her street. Sometimes he'd wave, sometimes he'd leave a small bag of bread on the front step, always the kind she liked best. Soft honey rolls, still warm. Grace never asked how he knew. She just accepted them quietly and tucked the bag inside before Linda or the girls noticed. One afternoon, Ethan caught her sweeping the porch. He parked across the street and walked over slowly, holding a small paper cup. "It's hot cocoa," he said, placing it on the porch rail. "Cold day today." Grace hesitated. "Is it safe?" she asked softly. "Completely," he smiled. "Just cocoa?" "No poison, I promise." She gave a faint laugh. It was the first time she had laughed in front of anyone in a long time. "Thank you," she whispered, holding the cup close like it was a treasure. From that day on, she started to look forward to his deliveries. Inside the house, things got worse. Linda had begun locking the fridge with a chain. Grace could only eat what was left over, if anything. Chloe and Samantha, sensing their mother's approval, became even more cruel. One day, Samantha grabbed Grace's journal and read it aloud. "Listen to this," she mocked, laughing. "His eyes are gentle, like they've seen pain, too." "Oh my God, Grace, you're in love with a homeless man." Grace lunged for the notebook, but Chloe pushed her back hard, laughing. "Relax. It's not like he's going to write about you in his diary. He probably doesn't even have one. Just a broken radio and a truck full of crumbs." Linda watched from the kitchen and said nothing. That night, Grace cried harder than she had in months. She tore the journal into pieces and burned them in a small pot by the attic window. The flames danced like tiny ghosts, carrying her words away. But no matter how hard she tried, she couldn't burn the feeling. Ethan wasn't like anyone she'd ever met. He saw her. He respected her. And somehow, he gave her back the parts of herself she thought had died. The next Friday, Ethan stopped by the diner after his shift. He didn't expect Grace to be there. He knew her stepmother wouldn't allow it, but he asked anyway. "Has she been in today?" he asked Miss Patty, the elderly diner owner. Miss Patty shook her head. "I haven't seen her since last Sunday. Girls wasting away in that house. I've known Linda for years. No soul in that woman." Ethan nodded silently, but his jaw clenched. He had seen these patterns before. Abuse hidden under Southern politeness. Cruelty dressed up as discipline. And he hated it. Meanwhile, back at the Collins house, things were escalating. Chloe and Samantha had been invited to a small garden party hosted by a wealthy widow in town. It was meant to be a quiet community gathering, but to Linda it was another opportunity to marry up her daughters. She spent the whole week sewing new dresses for them, using fabric bought with the money Grace earned by secretly cleaning houses. Of course, Grace wasn't invited. Instead, she was given a list of chores to complete before sundown, including scrubbing the porch, ironing linens, and preparing dinner. As the others left, Grace sat on the back steps for a moment. She didn't cry this time. She just stared. That was when Ethan pulled up, holding a small bag. "Figured you could use a break," he said. She smiled faintly. "I don't think I'm allowed to take breaks." "You are now," he said, handing her a sandwich and a bottle of lemonade. They sat on the steps together just for a few minutes. Grace didn't say much, but she didn't have to. Ethan knew how to sit in silence without making it uncomfortable. "You ever think about leaving?" he asked suddenly. Grace turned her head. "Every day." "But where would I go?" He looked down at his hands. "Anywhere has to be better than this." That night, Grace couldn't sleep. She kept hearing his words in her head. "You ever think about leaving?" Nobody had ever asked her that before. Nobody had ever implied she could. She looked out the attic window at the empty street, moonlight pouring over Ethan's truck, parked 2 houses down. For the first time, she felt the stirrings of something she hadn't allowed herself in years. A dream. The next morning, everything changed. Grace was outside watering the garden when a man pulled up in a black SUV. He was handsome, well-dressed, and confident. Linda practically flew down the steps to greet him. "Mr. Hayes, what a surprise." He explained that he was new in town, managing a local investment firm and looking to settle down. He had heard Linda had daughters. "I've got 2 beautiful girls," Linda gushed, "and a third, well, she's around somewhere." Grace stood silently in the background, clutching the garden hose. "Mr. Hayes looked past Linda and smiled warmly at Grace. "And what's your name?" Before she could speak, Linda stepped in. "That's just Grace. She's not polished. My late husband's daughter. She's more of a helper around the house." Grace lowered her eyes, humiliated. Ethan, who happened to be dropping off bread at the corner store, saw it all. From across the fence, their eyes met. Hers filled with shame. His filled with fury. He drove away, fists clenched on the steering wheel, heart racing. It was time to stop watching from a distance. Grace had been humiliated before, but never like this. The next few days after Mr. Hayes's visit were a blur. Linda couldn't stop bragging about how one of the most eligible bachelors in town had chosen our family. Chloe and Samantha took turns trying to impress him, while Grace was told to stay out of sight. "We don't want to scare him off," Linda had said with a sneer. "Pretty faces attract money, not scrawny housemaids." Mr. Hayes, to his credit, seemed polite to everyone, including Grace. But Linda made sure he was too busy to talk to her for more than a few seconds at a time. Grace didn't mind. In fact, she preferred it that way. Her heart wasn't with him, her thoughts were with Ethan. One evening, as the sun dipped low over the rooftops, Grace found a quiet moment behind the house. The yard was empty, the air warm. She sat on the porch steps, holding a small note in her hand. A folded scrap of paper she'd found tucked inside a bag of bread Ethan had dropped off earlier that day. "Tomorrow, after sunset, by the old oak tree." She read it again and again. That tree had stood behind the Collins house for generations. It was where her father used to read to her. It had been her safe place. Ethan had never been there, but somehow he knew. The next evening, Grace finished her chores early. Linda was busy helping Chloe get ready for a dinner with Mr. Hayes. Samantha had locked herself in the bathroom, experimenting with makeup tutorials. Grace slipped out the back door just before sunset. At the base of the oak tree, Ethan stood waiting. He had cleaned up, just slightly. No delivery cap. A dark button-up shirt. A quiet intensity in his eyes. Grace approached slowly, her heart pounding. "You came," he said, voice low. She nodded. "I don't have much time." "That's okay." "I won't take much." He took a step closer. For the first time, he reached for her hand. "I've been watching from the sidelines." and I can't do it anymore. Grace, I want to marry you." The words hit her like thunder, gentle but shocking. "What?" she whispered. "Not tomorrow, not next year, but soon. I want you to know I'm serious. I see you. I value you. And I won't let them break you." Tears welled up in her eyes. "But I have nothing. No dowry. No family support, no future." "You have more than all of that," Ethan said. "You have kindness, strength, integrity, and that's what I've been looking for." She couldn't believe what she was hearing. But in that moment, something inside her, the scared girl in the attic, the silent servant, finally exhaled. "Okay," she whispered. "Yes." They stood together in silence as the wind rustled the leaves above them. It felt like the first true moment of her life. Grace returned home that night with her heart floating and her feet barely touching the ground. For the first time in years, she believed things could change. But dreams are fragile things, especially in the wrong hands. The next morning, Linda was already fuming. She had noticed Grace's absence and wasn't buying the excuse that she'd gone for a walk. "What were you really doing?" she snapped. "Sneaking off to see your broke delivery boy?" Grace didn't answer. She didn't have to. Linda's eyes narrowed with rage. "You ungrateful little girl. After everything I've done for you." Grace bit her tongue. If she said one word, just one, it would turn into war. By mid-afternoon, Linda's rage turned into action. She called a meeting with her daughters. "If she thinks she's going to run off and marry that man," she said, "then we need to act now." Samantha scoffed. "What's the big deal? Let her. She'll be miserable and broke forever." "No," Linda growled. "That man is dangerous. I don't trust him. No family, no background, no future." Chloe, ever the schemer, leaned in. "What if we make him look like a fraud? Or better yet, make her look like a disaster?" Linda's eyes lit up. "We'll ruin her engagement before it even begins." 2 days later, Ethan came to the house to speak to Linda properly. He wanted to do things the right way, respectful, formal. He had a simple speech prepared in his head. "I care about Grace. I want to marry her. I'll provide for her." He never got the chance to say it. Linda answered the door with a forced smile, motioned him to the living room, and called for Grace. But while Grace was walking in from the backyard, something else was happening in the kitchen. Samantha and Chloe were standing over a pot of stew, the one Grace had spent all morning preparing. "She's supposed to serve this to Ethan's family when they come visit, right?" Chloe smirked. "Let's make it unforgettable." They dumped an entire container of salt into the pot, then hot pepper, then another. They stirred quickly and left the kitchen, giggling. Grace entered the room, unaware of the sabotage. Ethan stood, looking proud but nervous. "Hi," he said. "You look happy." "I am," she said, smiling despite the tension in the air. Linda, with fake politeness, insisted on serving Ethan lunch. "Grace made it herself," she said. "She's really improved." Ethan took one bite and choked. The spice hit like a wall. His face turned red. Grace's eyes widened. "What?" "That's impossible. I tasted it earlier." Linda stood up dramatically. "My goodness, is this how you plan to feed a husband? No wonder no one's married you." Chloe and Samantha pretended to be shocked. Ethan put the fork down gently. "I know what's happening here," he said calmly, "and it's not going to work." Linda scoffed. "Excuse me? You're trying to humiliate her. You think if you sabotage her, I'll walk away." He turned to Grace. "I'm not going anywhere." Not because of a bowl of soup, but the damage was done. Later that day, rumors started spreading through the town. Grace poisoned a man she was trying to marry. Some even whispered Ethan had stormed out in anger. The church community, which had once admired Grace as Robert Collins' daughter, now watched her with suspicious eyes. Grace stayed in her room for 2 days, too ashamed to show her face. When Ethan came by the house, Linda lied. "She's resting, she's sick. Maybe it's for the best if you just moved on." Grace stared at the ceiling for hours. She hadn't seen Ethan since the kitchen disaster. Every time she peeked out the window, his truck was gone. A part of her wanted to believe he would come back, that he would fight for her. But another part, the part molded by years of disappointment, whispered, "He's gone, just like everyone else." On the 3rd day, Grace finally stepped outside. She walked to the mailbox, head down, arms crossed. A neighbor passed by without speaking. A woman at the corner store glanced at her and shook her head. The rumors had spread like wildfire. She tried to trap him. She ruined the proposal on purpose. She's not right in the head. Grace held it in until she got back inside, then ran to her attic room and collapsed into tears. Meanwhile, Ethan sat in his truck outside town, staring at the steering wheel. He knew exactly what Linda had done. But part of him was afraid Grace had believed the lie too. He replayed the meal, her confusion, her pain, her voice saying, "I tasted it earlier. It didn't make sense that she would do it." But doubt, cruel, familiar doubt, crept in. He had trusted people before and gotten burned, betrayed, used. "Maybe this is just another lesson," he whispered to himself. He turned the key and drove away. Back at the Collins home, Linda celebrated quietly. "He's gone," she said smugly. "She'll never find someone like that again." Chloe and Samantha laughed. "Maybe now she'll stay in her place," Samantha added. But Linda wasn't done. "We still have Mr. Hayes coming to dinner next week. Let's not waste any more time. Chloe, you'll take the lead. He seems to like brunettes." Grace overheard every word. Something inside her went cold. That night, she sat by the attic window, staring at the stars. The sky was clear, but her thoughts were stormy. Everything she had dared to hope for, gone. But even in that pain, something new stirred. Not despair. Resolve. If no one is going to save me, I'll have to save myself. She rose from the floor, wiped her tears, and opened the old wooden chest her father had left behind. Inside were a few old photos. A Bible, a leather-bound notebook, and at the very bottom, a sealed envelope with her name on it. Her hands trembled as she opened it. "My dearest Grace, if you're reading this, I'm no longer with you. But I need you to know, your worth doesn't come from this house or from anyone who tries to make you feel small. You are destined for more than they will ever understand. Hold your head high. Love, Dad." Grace sat there for a long time, holding the letter to her heart. For the first time since childhood, she didn't feel invisible. She felt seen, loved. By someone who no longer lived, but who had never stopped believing in her. The storm was far from over, but something was changing. Grace Collins had been broken, betrayed, and humiliated, but the fire had started, and soon they would all know who she really was. Grace had changed. She still walked softly, still kept her voice low, but something in her spirit had shifted. She no longer looked down when Linda passed. She didn't flinch when Chloe tossed an insult or Samantha rolled her eyes. There was something in the way she held her head, a calmness, a quiet fire. But with Ethan gone and rumors still swirling, no one in town could see it yet. It had been almost 2 weeks since she last saw him. Each night she wondered if he had left for good, if he had believed the lies, if maybe, just maybe, he had never meant it in the first place. But something in her heart refused to give up on him. Something told her, this isn't over. She was right. One Sunday morning, Grace was in the church kitchen, helping Miss Patty, when she heard a familiar voice. "Excuse me, ma'am, is Grace Collins here?" She turned around, heart pounding. It was Ethan, clean-shaven, dressed in a charcoal gray blazer and polished boots, no delivery cap, no truck keys in hand. He looked like a different man, but his eyes were the same. "Can we talk?" he asked softly. Miss Patty didn't say a word, just smiled and slipped out the back door. They sat together on a bench behind the church. Ethan took a long breath. "I've been a fool," he said. "I let doubt win. I let what people said mess with what I knew in my gut." Grace blinked back tears. "I thought you were gone for good." "I almost was," he admitted. "But every time I tried to move on, something pulled me back." He reached into his pocket and pulled out a small velvet box. "You were never the problem, Grace. The problem was me, not trusting what I saw in you. And I'm done running." He opened the box. "Will you marry me? Not someday, not later. Now?" Grace gasped. Her hand flew to her mouth. Inside the box was a stunning vintage diamond ring. Elegant. Understated, but unmistakably expensive. "Ethan, how?" He smiled. "There's something I need to tell you." They went for a long drive outside town, just the two of them. As they pulled into a private road lined with oak trees, Grace realized they were no longer in familiar territory. At the end of the road sat a massive, elegant estate. 3 stories, white pillars, a wraparound porch, and rose gardens as far as the eye could see. Grace's jaw dropped. "What is this place?" "My home," Ethan said calmly. "Well, one of them." Grace turned to him, stunned. "I don't understand. I thought you were a delivery guy." He chuckled. "I was. But only because I wanted to be. You see, my grandfather left me a real estate empire. Hundreds of properties. Tens of millions in investments." Grace's eyes widened. "Then why?" "Because I needed to know who I could trust," he said. "I've been used before. Lied to, gold diggers, opportunists. But when I met you, you treated me like a person, not a paycheck." He looked her in the eyes. "You saw value in me when I had nothing to offer. That's the kind of woman I want by my side." Grace was speechless. He walked her through the house. Maids greeted her with smiles. Every corner was elegant, peaceful, and full of sunlight. Back at the Collins home, Linda was fuming. Grace hadn't come home the night before. She had left a short note. "I'm safe. Don't wait up." But it wasn't enough. Linda had planned a dinner for Mr. Hayes, hoping to finally secure a match with Chloe. Now everything was thrown off. When Grace walked in later that evening, glowing and calm, Chloe sneered. "What, were you out begging for crumbs again?" Grace didn't answer. She just set her bag down and walked to the dining table. "You may want to sit down," she said. Linda laughed mockingly. "Oh, look who thinks she can give orders now." Grace reached into her coat pocket and placed the engagement ring box on the table. Chloe's eyes widened. Samantha gasped. "Is this a joke?" Linda hissed. Grace opened the box. Ethan proposed, and I said yes. What happened next was chaos. Linda exploded with anger, shouting that it was impossible, that she forbid it. But Grace didn't flinch. "You don't control me anymore," she said, steady and firm. "You never really did." She turned to leave, then stopped. "Also, you should know. Ethan's not who you think he is. He's not poor. He's not broken. He's a billionaire." Silence fell across the room. Grace walked out, calm as ever. A week later, the engagement was announced in the church bulletin. The whole town was stunned. The delivery guy was actually one of the richest men in the state. The maid in the Collins home was about to become his wife. People started treating Grace differently overnight. Smiles, handshakes, sudden invitations. She remained kind, but cautious. She hadn't forgotten. Meanwhile, Ethan invited Linda, Chloe, and Samantha to dinner, out of courtesy, not obligation. They arrived dressed like they were meeting royalty. Ethan greeted them politely. Grace, ever gracious, welcomed them in with warm eyes, even if her heart was guarded. Dinner was served by a team of staff. The room glittered with crystal, gold-trimmed china, and candles. Linda could barely breathe. "This is your house," she whispered to Ethan. "One of them," he replied casually. Samantha dropped her fork. Chloe looked like she might faint. After dessert, Ethan stood and raised a glass. "To Grace, the most honest, strong, and compassionate person I've ever met. And to second chances, because sometimes the best people rise from the worst places." Grace looked at him with tears in her eyes. Everyone applauded. Even Linda. But deep inside, she burned with shame and envy. The news of Grace and Ethan's engagement spread through the town like wildfire. Not a whisper, not a rumor, an announcement. It was printed in the church bulletin, posted on the community board outside the grocery store, shared on Facebook by the pastor's wife. Grace Collins to wed Ethan Blake, local businessman, heir to Blake Enterprises. Those who had laughed behind Grace's back now fell silent, and those who once ignored her scrambled to remember her name. Even the mayor's wife called to congratulate her. Grace was polite, but distant. She hadn't forgotten the way people had looked at her. The pity. The silence, the whispers. But the real reckoning came at the Spring Harvest Festival. It was the town's largest annual event. Music, dancing, contests, and food stretching across the town square. Everyone came, and this year, the planning committee had invited Ethan Blake to be a guest speaker and sponsor. The moment his name was announced, jaws dropped. The delivery guy, Grace arrived with him. And not in a pickup truck. They stepped out of a luxury black car, hand in hand. Grace wore a soft blue dress and a pearl necklace Ethan had given her the night before. Her hair was tied back elegantly. Her smile was calm, but steady. She didn't need to say a word. Her presence said everything. Linda, Chloe, and Samantha were already there. Chloe clutched her wine glass so tightly it cracked. Samantha stared as if she'd seen a ghost. Linda's lips tightened into a fake smile. She tugged at her outdated dress and tried to stand taller. Ethan greeted them with a nod. Grace did too. Gracious, but cold. The tables had turned. As they walked through the crowd, people lined up to greet them. "Grace, we're so proud of you. Didn't we always say she was something special? I knew Ethan had good taste." Grace gave small, polite nods. Ethan's hand never left hers, but she noticed it. The looks, the ones from girls who used to snub her. From the church ladies who never once invited her to tea. From the neighbors who once let Linda's lies spread unchecked. And in those looks was a quiet truth. They were wrong. Later that evening, Ethan was invited on stage to speak. The crowd applauded as he took the mic. "Thank you for welcoming me into this community," he began. "When I moved here, I didn't tell anyone who I really was. I wanted to see people as they truly are. And I did." He paused, glancing at Grace in the crowd. "I met someone who treated me with kindness, even when she had every reason not to trust anyone. Someone who showed me grace, literally and figuratively. And now, I'm honored to call her my fiancée." The crowd burst into applause. Some cheered, others wiped their eyes. But Linda. She turned to her daughters and whispered, "We should have been nicer to that girl." Chloe replied, "It's too late for that, Mom." After the speech, a local reporter approached Grace for an interview. "What would you say to the people who judged you before they knew your story?" Grace looked at the camera and smiled. "I'd say thank you. Because their rejection pushed me to grow stronger." Their silence taught me to speak for myself, and their cruelty reminded me of the value of kindness. It was short, poised, and it echoed across social media that night. Later, while walking to the car, Grace heard a voice call her name. It was Miss Patty, the diner owner. "I always believed in you," she said, hugging her tightly. "I know you did," Grace whispered back. Just a few steps behind, Chloe stood watching. Her hands were clenched. Her makeup was smudged. And her pride was shattered. Samantha stood next to her, arms folded. "What now?" she muttered. "Now," Chloe said bitterly, "we go home and try not to drown in our own regret." That night, as fireworks lit up the sky above the town square, Grace stood beside Ethan on the porch of the festival stage. Music played softly, children laughed, elderly couples danced. She leaned against Ethan's shoulder and whispered, "I still don't understand why you chose me." He turned to her, gently lifting her chin. "Because you saw me when I had nothing, and now that I have everything, I only want to see it with you." She smiled. Not because of the wealth, or the applause, or the revenge, but because she had finally found something no one could fake: respect, love, and peace. The following weeks were filled with new beginnings. Grace and Ethan moved into his estate just outside of town. Not because it was grand, but because it was theirs. A place with space to breathe, to grow, to rest. Grace kept her part-time job at the library, by choice. Ethan offered her anything she wanted, but she told him, "I don't want to forget what it feels like to earn something, even if it's small." He respected that, loved her even more for it. One morning, Grace stood on the wraparound porch, sipping coffee, looking out over the quiet fields. The sun was soft, and the breeze was kind, and yet her mind drifted back, to the attic, to the kitchen insults, to the fake smiles and slammed doors. The pain didn't vanish overnight, but it no longer defined her. "You survived," she whispered to herself, "and you didn't lose your soul." A few days later, Ethan surprised her with a gift: the old Collins house. Not to live in, but to choose what to do with it. "You don't owe them anything," he said. "But if there's any part of your past you want to reclaim, it's yours." Grace took a few days to think. Then she made her decision. She converted it into a community shelter for women, those escaping toxic homes, abusive situations, or simply needing a place to rebuild. She called it the second step. When someone asked her why that name, she smiled. Because the first step is survival. The second is believing you deserve better. The day the shelter opened, Linda showed up. Not with anger or pride, but with bags under her eyes and shame on her face. "I don't expect forgiveness," she said, standing at the doorway. Grace didn't say a word. She looked at her, long and hard, and for the first time she didn't feel small. "I forgave you a long time ago," Grace said softly, "but I won't forget." Linda nodded quietly. "That's fair." She walked away without asking for anything. And that was enough. Chloe and Samantha each went their own way. Chloe moved to Atlanta, trying to reinvent herself. Samantha stayed in town but avoided Grace's name like a bad memory. Occasionally, they would cross paths. Grace always nodded politely. She had no desire for revenge anymore. She had already won. The church ladies began inviting her to events. Grace went sometimes, not out of obligation, but because she could now choose. She hosted Sunday brunch at the estate once a month. Not fancy, just warm. Seniors, children, neighbors, strangers. Everyone came. Everyone was fed. She and Ethan were known not just for their money, but for their kindness. The girl they once ignored had become the woman the whole town respected. One evening, as they watched the sun set over their backyard, Ethan turned to her. Do you ever wish it all had gone differently? That it hadn't been so hard? Grace thought for a long time. No, she finally said. If it hadn't, I might have never met you. I might have never met myself. He pulled her close. You're the strongest woman I know. She smiled. Not because she wanted to be strong, but because she had learned how to be. And as fireflies danced in the air around them, Grace closed her eyes, took a deep breath, and whispered, I'm finally home. Sometimes the path to peace is paved with pain. Sometimes the people who break you are the ones who lead you to your breakthrough. But when you hold on to kindness, integrity, and faith, even in the fire, you come out gold. Have you ever been underestimated like Grace? Have you ever had someone treat you badly, only to realize later they were wrong about you? Drop a comment below and let me know. Rate this story from 1 to 10. How did it make you feel? What was your favorite part? What lesson will you take away from Grace's journey? If you enjoyed this story and want more like it, filled with emotion, wisdom, and powerful lessons, please don't forget to comment. Like the video, subscribe to the channel for more stories every week. Thank you for watching, and remember, your story isn't over yet. I'll see you in the next one.